Well, hello, everybody. Today we're going to be having a conversation with author Robert Wahl, who's written two books, The Cherrick and Ride the Giant Wolf. Now, Robert is a former TV reporter, producer in Augusta, Georgia. He worked at Augusta National Golf Course as a salesman. And let's get started. Okay, Rob, you've written two novels of fiction, both with Native American themes. Why Indians?
Well, it started, I guess, with my grandfather. I think I said something derogatory about Indians when I was young, and he said you shouldn't say that because you're part Indian. So my interest started from there. And, I watched a lot of cowboys and Indian shows, and they always depicted the Indian as the bad guy, and turns out that's not the case. For most part, they were pretty great people. So that's where it started.
That's interesting. Okay, now your first book, Ride the Giant Wolf, what's the significance of Giant Wolf?
Well, horses are not native to North America, and Indians didn't know what horses were. So they thought they were big dogs, giant wolves, or they gave several names to them. So it's about the discovery of a horse and how it affects life as people knew it back then, because obviously it changes everything. Instead of walking through a hunting area, you're riding through the hunting area. You can go about 15 times farther than you normally would, and everything would be fresher. So, food-wise. So it changed their culture immensely.
Wow, so that's a good snapshot of what the book's about. Okay, now although the book is fictional, is there any basis of fact or history?
Yep. I did a lot of research at the Toledo Library. That's my hometown. They had a pretty vast collection of resources. And so I studied a lot, and then the more I studied, the more interested I got. And just things led to another. That book was meant to have the first meeting between Indian and white man. And not always did it go very well. It often ended in tragedy. But as the book wrote itself, and it really did, I decided to do a little bit twist on it. And the second book is going to have the meeting, the second book of that nature is going to have the meeting between white man and Indian. I already have the story all worked out.
Wow, it sounds like you didn't have any writer's block with that book then.
No, it wrote itself. And it's pretty amazing.
Okay, now what do you say to critics who contend that white men can't write about or portray an accurate portrait of Native Americans?
Well, I guess I would refer them to the Broadway play Hamilton, blacks portraying white people. There's nothing wrong with it. It's called creative license. And critics will often, say you can't do this, you can't do that. But you have creative license, you can do anything. Women write about men write about women. I'm not a tree, but I think I can write about a tree, so that's how I approach it.
Okay, it looks like you did quite a bit of research on the book. Can you expand on that a little bit more? Or?
Well, just basically all that information I got from the Toledo Public Library, brought books home. I made immense notes and used Indian words. As a matter of fact, the second book I wrote, called The Cherrick, is an Indian word that means enemy. So the Cherrick is the enemy, and that's what the basis of that is. So again, research. That's the whole story.
Now, the creative process is an intriguing concept.
Right.
Where do your ideas come from, Rob?
That's a question I'm not sure anybody can answer, to be honest with you. How does the mind function? It's just a series of, random thoughts, I guess. And then when something sounds right, you just go ahead and do it. I can't explain the creative process, but when you're sitting there, for instance, sometimes when I really get into it, I'll be sitting there and I'm writing, and all of a sudden I look outside and it's dark. And I've been writing since maybe 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Here it is, 8 o'clock in the evening, and it feels like maybe half an hour went by. But 6 hours went by. When that happens, I know I really got into it. So random thoughts, who knows where the ideas come from? I can't explain it. They just happen.
Yeah, now I was always curious, do authors think of the title first, the ending? What's the genesis of the book?
Well, I have a brother. His name is Jan Wahl. He's written probably close to 130 children's books and some novels and some interesting stories about people that he knew. And he, first of all, he influenced me quite a bit. What's the question again?
Do you think of the title first?
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. He thinks of the title first always in his books. I don't. I shape the title around what I find interesting in the book or what motivates me.
Oh, so everybody's a little bit different than the authors.
Oh, yeah.
Now, would you categorize Ride the Giant Wolf? Was it written for young adults or adults?
Well, a lot of people think it was a young adult novel. I happen to think that it's a little bit more than that. So, you can categorize it how you want, but I feel that it crosses all the lines.
Now, I'm curious, what fascinates you about Indians?
Their culture is very colorful. I mean, it's a very romantic culture. They have just about everything equates to spirits. I mean, even a tree is sacred. If they have to kill an animal, they usually say a prayer to it, thanking them for giving up their life so they can survive. If you read their culture and their stories, I think fascinating. In both books, I put a lot of stories Indians tell one another about the makeup of their culture, about how their views on life, nature, all that stuff. So I like to think that my books portray a strong element.
Oh, okay, Rob, that's it. Very interesting. Now, how would you describe your writing style?
Well, I was a news producer and I was a news photographer at one time. So I just equate my book to visual. So, I see a movie, actually, when I'm writing. I'm not seeing a book. I see a movie. I see scenes developing. So it's like one long picture, photographs, whatever you want to do, film, and that's the way I describe it.
Wow, that's fascinating. I never thought of it that way.
Yeah. Some people are a little bit more. I'm not terribly literary when I see what I mean by that folks take a certain approach that's let's back up. My approach is more what is happening and what are the thoughts in the person's mind. But I try to keep it to a bare minimum. I try to minimize it where some writers like Faulkner just will give 3 pages of something that I could write in 2 sentences. So, whatever floats your boat.
Why not be concise? I like your approach. Okay, there's quite a few twists and turns in writing.
Hang on. Start over. I'm going to lean back a little bit.
Well, sure. Yeah, get comfortable, Robert.
Okay.
Okay, there's quite a few twists and turns in Ride the Giant Wolf and surprises. Can you tell us a little bit more about your thought process?
Well, I like to be surprised when I read a book. And it always fascinates me how you can suggest something on page 2, and then on page 122 it shows up in completely different form than what you thought it was. So that's the approach I take. I like twists and turns. I think both books have an ending that's dramatically different than what you might expect. And there are a lot of plot twists throughout the books.
Oh, okay. Okay, Rob, you mentioned your brother Jan. What other writers do you admire?
Well, it comes to mind Jack London. He wrote Call of the Wild, and he again writes very visually, very dramatically too. And he can describe in one sentence, and you get the effect of, a great piece of writing. I mean, it's absolutely fantastic. Another one is Kenneth Roberts. He wrote Northwest Passage and several other books, but that's my favorite of his. And of course, that deals with the exploration of this country through Indian Territory by Robert Rogers back in the mid 1700s, and just fascinating reading as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, good answer. Now, your second novel, The Cherrick, Something Dark and Evil. Can you give us a little background on that book and what it's about?
Well, the whole genesis of that book had to do with the fact that I think that there is a mistreatment of some Indians, obviously, in this country, and I think most people would agree with that. So it's a story about revenge in a way. And the Cherrick simply means the enemy in Pawnee. And so it's about a revenge of a kind of a spiritual nature. And I don't want to give away too much of the story, but you want to call it a horror story, you can call it a horror story. If you want to call it a mystery, intrigue, I would like to think that it falls in all those places. I'm just giving a description of what my idea is. I'm not saying these books are great or anything else up like that. That's for you to decide, not for me to say.
Okay, now how would you categorize it, Rob? Is it a horror, mystery, intrigue, or what? Or
all three.
All three?
Yep.
Okay, good. Fascinating. How'd you come up with the personalities of the characters?
Well, believe it or not, a lot of the characters come from real life. A lot of the names in the book come from real life. So, I knew a news reporter, worked with her, that she wasn't afraid of anything. And that's the basis for one of my characters. The lead character, I actually knew a gentleman who became a Navy SEAL, and he was quite an athlete in college down in the South. And I covered him as a news reporter, and I found him to be a pretty interesting guy. He gave up a pro football career just so he could go into the Navy SEALs, which I think is an admirable thing to do.
Wow. So. Now, in the Cherokee, you make references to Native American culture.
Yep.
You find that you find that fascinating, and why again?
It's a colorful culture, is what it is. All cultures are colorful in their own way, but I think American Indian is somewhat unique in that the spiritual aspects really are overwhelming in their society.
Okay, Rob, now where do you go from here? Is there a third novel, a fourth? What lies ahead?
I'm not lacking for ideas, I'll tell you that. Whether they're good ones or not, that's for me to find out, I guess. But I already have several books in mind. I probably have 4 or 5 right now, and if I tried, I probably could come up with 4 or 5 more. As I said before, as long as I have a brain, I'll try to write. The question is, do I have a brain? So,
well, I think you have a creative brain, Rob, because I see you have a Kachina doll collection, and I know you make totem poles. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you a little story. I moved out to Seattle for a very short period of time, and there are totem poles all throughout Seattle and everything else like this. And so I had the bright idea of I wanted to do a story about one of the more well-known totem makers. So he lived up beyond Seattle. So I went to visit him one day. He didn't know I was coming. Knocked on the door, had the address, and the wife said he's out in the garage doing a totem pole. So when I went out there, he kind of looks at me, well, you want to do an interview, huh? And he said, well, let's do the interview the right way. And I said, okay, well, what is the right way? He said, go get some beer. So I did. I went and got a 6-pack of beer. He said, no. I said, get some beer. I said, you mean like more beer? So I got 4 6-packs. And this gentleman was rather large. I tell this story, not many people believe it because that's hard for me to believe myself. But he drank every bottle of beer.
Wow.
In probably 4 hours. And he didn't stop working, which means he didn't go to the bathroom, which means that I was just shocked. He was a good 400 pounds. He was at least that. But he was a fascinating guy. He told me all about the culture of Kachina dolls and totem poles. It's Indians across the board love to study each other. And so Kachina dolls are mostly native to southwest United States, not the northwest where a lot of the totem poles are. But that's an Indian. Everybody seems to enjoy all the cultures that are Indian.
Oh, that's very interesting. And now, one more question. Did you study creative writing in college?
I did. I took a creative writing course. It's the only course that I think I did really well. I wasn't the best student in the world, let's put it that way. I didn't put my heart into it that much. I was too much of a dreamer. And that's why I think I was made to write, because I am a dreamer. I do think about those things. My concentration level is very good when I focus on something, but I didn't focus on studies like I should have.
Okay, well, I think that concludes our interview. And if anybody has any questions, leave them in the comments.